Good evening, Graham, as well.
I was in airplane mode.
You in what
That's the
mode?
problem.
What mode?
Airplane mode. If you're in airplane mode, that's obviously very bad,
Well,
unless you're
except
actually on a
except you're
plane, in
actually on
which
an
case it's good.
airplane, and that's fine. Although
Yeah,
this week being on an airplane has been, oh dear, oh dear. Anyway,
yeah.
we won't go there.
Let's just not go there, Charles.
No, exactly. Now, Graham,
I've
good
got I've
evening.
got a quick interruption straight away.
Please, absolutely, fire away.
I feel after my remarks on not Blur, Pulp's first album, 24 Years,
Hmm,
called More last week. I
hmm.
need to clarify my viewpoints on it, having played it a lot. So here it is.
This is not the first time
Pulp's
you've
new
done this,
album.
Graham. Not the first time you've done this.
Yeah, I know, but Pulp's new album is more Leonard Cohen than Roxy music.
That's the kind of brief snip of information that looks good when put with quote marks around it on some kind of billboard
I'm hoping
somewhere.
for a job with Pulp as their PR man.
That's the one. That's right. Otherwise, it could be the work of Pulp Fiction. But there we go. That'd be great if that could happen. So, Graham, this week has been overshadowed by the death of one of the truly great stars. And maybe star's the wrong word because he's more than that. And actually, maybe star isn't the right word at all. But
He wasn't
one of
made
the,
to be a star. He
no,
never really was a
exactly.
star. He was a
No,
legend
exactly.
quite
We're
early
talking
on.
about the life of Brian Wilson, and God bless you, Brian, for all that you brought to us. Graham, I mean, this is a passing. Okay, let's call him a musical giant, and I know you've got various points you wish to make about it, and to reflect on in four parts. Um, let's have part one straight away, Graham.
Well, I like to think about things personally because music is a very personal thing. So
Yes.
my very potted history of Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, is entirely personal. So the
Mm.
first time I actually bought or received a Beach Boys album was in 1977 when I was still at school, and it was the new album called The Beach Boys Love You. And at that point, it was like a sort of comeback. Brian Wilson's back after his mental illness and his problems finishing the Smile album. Now, I knew nothing about the Smile album at that time. I didn't even really understand Pet Sounds. All I knew was that the Beach Boys had I think it's 15 Golden Greats or 20 Golden Greats, which was a huge success in Britain and America. So I bought the Beach Boys Love You or was given it as a present on
Mm.
cassette tape. And I played it, and it's really upbeat and it's really enjoyable, positive pop. But it's got a sort of like it feels like a sort of like modern band try to do a sort of glam rock approach with Beach Boys pop songs with a slight sort of 1960s hippie childlike attitude. So it's a bit of an odd album, and you couldn't actually call it a classic, even though nowadays if a young band released it now, it would be like a sort of like indie alternative classic.
Were you politely calling it a mess there, Graham, without calling it a mess?
No, it wasn't a mess, it was odd. And there was always a bit of peculiarity about Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. And the Beach Boys Love You is out there on the oddness stakes, even though it's an entirely pop album.
So it's not an album I've ever heard.
Well, it was big in America, it didn't do much in Britain.
It's fair to say the most iconic album and the one that was seen as breathtaking, groundbreaking at the time. Pet Sounds is the one that people reach to maybe as being the greatest of all rock music albums made. Some would contest with that with Beatles albums, whatever. But the impact of that album, not least on McCartney and Lennon, and feeling, my God, we're going to have to up our game as songwriters, was probably his most significant achievement.
It was the epitome of all the things he was great at. And his entire career had flashes of that greatness, all those things he was good at, brilliant at, almost every album. But it only reached a complete coherence artistically and melody wise on Pet Sounds. But I first bought it when I was at Edinburgh University in 1981,
Mm,
when I used to scour the record shops because you had to, because each record shop had a different sort of like back catalogue. It was quite hard to
yeah.
find all albums.
Mm,
And I came across Pet Sounds and I bought it because I'd read somewhere that he called it his attempt to do teenage symphonies to God. And at that point, Pet Sounds didn't fit the landscape. It was all punk, post punk, synth
mm.
pop, new romantics. It wasn't something you'd necessarily feel obliged to buy, but Teenage Symphonies to God sort of like struck a chord. So I bought it. And I've looked into this. It's this. It's got the famous front cover with the Beach Boys petting animals at a zoo. But
Yes.
the background, rather than being green in my copy, is brown because it's on Brother Records, which was their own label that they actually set up in '67, in which then later re-released Pet Sounds. And I looked it up, and it's now worth 68 quid. So, so I'm quite happy about my pet copy of Pet Sounds. But at the time when I bought an 81, played it a lot. I thought, what's the big deal? There's only
Mm.
4 or 5 great pop tunes. The rest's a bit melancholic and eerie and atmospheric, and it's all understated and subtle. And so I didn't immediately go, "Wow, this is work of genius." But it is a work of genius because the greatness lies in all the small things. It's a agglomeration of lots of small things which are just right, just perfect sounds, which add up to a bigger whole. And it's also, although it's not a religious album, it does sound spiritual. That's the strange thing about Brian Wilson. They came from California, they were raised in a traditional family household, they didn't go to art school, and yet there's that spiritual aspect, the unspoken spiritual aspect, usually, which shines through the music, which obviously in Pet Sounds is its best representative.
Why? What would you read into him saying teenage symphonies?
Uh, well, well, you could, there's been lots of books about his various mental health problems, partly exacerbated by the failure to finish Smile album
Yes.
in 1967, partly his drug intake, which spiraled out of control as the swinging 60s start to really swing.
Mhm.
And I think he himself would have realized that he was adolescent. It was almost like he was a Peter Pan character who never quite grew up. I think he himself realized he was odd, did Brian Wilson. I don't think Brian Wilson ever thought, I'm just a normal chap. He wasn't really a surfer. He did have his brothers. He was part of a band and a gang, but he was always a bit of an oddity. And I think he knew that as well.
He never looked like the rest of them. I mean, that might seem a statement of the obvious, but he didn't. He stood out.
Yeah, he didn't look comfortable being a pop star.
No,
Didn't look
exactly.
comfortable wearing any of the gear that he'd wear to look
No,
good on
exactly.
stage. Didn't fit the brief whatsoever. If he'd been a solo act from the beginning, he would never have made it.
Mm. So, Graham, that's, if you like, point number two. Um, you can make point number three. You're welcome to do that. And then we can perhaps look at, the mental struggles that Brian had and how that shaped a long, long part of his life. So, your third recollection, Graham, if you would.
Well, this goes to 1997, and this is a book which directly influenced my Charm magazine, which I had for 4 years in
Mm.
Leeds, York, and Harrogate between '97 and 2001. And it's called Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys: How Deep Is the Ocean? Essays and Memories by Paul Williams. He set up Crawdaddy magazine in America when he was 18, before Jan Wenner set up Rolling Stone. So Crawdaddy was the first music magazine in America which took pop and rock seriously. And to Paul Williams, who's a brilliant writer, he set up when he was 18. And the book's a compendium of his best essays about the Beach Boys. And he met Brian Wilson in 1966. He spent time in Brian Wilson's house in LA. He
Mm.
smoked dope with Brian Wilson. He
Mm.
knew the band, he knew the producers, he knew the head of Brother Records. So he got the inside story of Pet Sounds and Smile as they were happening. And so the book, it is a real living book. It's not like someone looking back to the past because he's read lots of other books and read magazine articles. He was there the whole time. And the reason it influenced me was because the best bits are all about Smile and why Smile was not finished in the 60s. And he knows because he was there. And the style of the writing is really intelligent, a lot of deep analysis of the meaning of the music and the meaning of Brian Wilson's life. But it's also emotional and passionate, very personal, fearless, and sort of freewheeling. And that directly fed into the style of articles that I wrote for Charm,
Yes.
and reviews, interviews, everything.
Mm.
So that book, which Nick Wood and his then partner Kate gave me in 1997 for my birthday,
Mm.
Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, How Deep Is the Ocean by Paul Williams,
Mm.
is great because it makes Smile look like the biggest mystery in pop. It makes it look like Rosebud and Citizen Kane. Why did it not happen?
I'm right in thinking, Graham, a documentary came out not that long ago, with Brian obviously pictured in the sandpit, struggling to make a smile, a kind of iconic image in its own way. I can't remember what it was called, the documentary,
Long
but
Promised Road.
that'll be it. That'll be it.
Well, there's been quite a few very good documentaries about Brian and the Beach
Mm.
Boys in the last 30 years.
Mm.
Ever since he came out of his drug addictions and his mental health problems in the late 80s and went back to playing live and releasing some solo albums. So there's been a lot of great programs since then. Although when he emerged back from his semi-hibernation and semi-reclusive state, he wasn't exactly the same Brian Wilson who disappeared about 1967 to a degree, because although he'd managed to tame his mental health problems, they hadn't completely gone away, and they'd wreaked great havoc on his capabilities and his mentality, which obviously got worse the longer he lived.
He was due to come and play at the Leeds Arena. I can't remember which year, and the tour was cancelled. So the last opportunity to see Brian um, passed me by, and but I do remember that was. I can't remember what year that would be, but it wouldn't necessarily be that long ago that that was the case. But of course, by that stage, I'm not saying that people were mocking, but um, matters like 5 songwriting credits for his doctors on one of his latter day solo releases.
That was his solo album 1988
Mm,
when Doctor Eugene Landy was looking
yes,
after him, and
yes,
there's been that film Love and Mercy with John Cusack where you see that
yeah,
Landy actually manipulated the situation,
yeah.
and that's why he got songwriting credits because he basically wanted the money.
Mhm. But I mean, that's not the Brian Wilson one chooses to remember. I mean, it's part of the story of what can happen, what damage can happen, uh, the vulnerability, the fragility of the creative spirit, and someone of such sublime talent. And I would put God Only Knows up there as perhaps the most sublime pop song ever written.
I
That
prefer
level.
Surfs Up off Smile.
Do you?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think God Only Knows is a
tell me
bit
why.
it's
Tell me why.
slightly overrated.
Right, okay, that's controversial. Let's go for it. Why Surf's Up?
Surfs Up is sublime beyond meaning. It isn't just a love song. It's impossible to define what Surf's Up actually is. That's how good it is. And it has distinct different musical sections and progressions. It's quite a complex song, even though the melodies are fantastic throughout. And it, it's like it's come from another planet. Whereas God Only Knows sounds human. It sounds like the best love song a human being could do, but it doesn't sound otherworldly, and also it hasn't got distinct sections and progressions. Basically, it's a beautiful melody repeated almost to the end. So once you've heard the first verse of God Only Knows, you've heard the whole thing really. And although it's a great song, I think Surf's Up's bigger achievement.
I can see where you're coming from that looking at that, if you like, scientifically, and that's fair enough. I would prefer to look at it as the emotional response to a song, and I don't
Mm.
think any song has moved me like God Only Knows has moved me. And I would just point to going to a concert where the late Terry Hall, another one of my favorite artists, God bless you, Terry, as well. He was performing in a little Leeds venue, and he was performing solo, but with, from memory, I think two backing singers and I think a cellist. And he
Mm.
performed God Only Knows, and he cried as he finished it because he was so moved by singing that song.
Mm, mm.
And we think of Terry Hall as being very capable of being a highly cynical character and a Mickey taker at times and waspish, as well as a man who loved melody. And he was that moved to cry at the end of a song.
Yeah.
I will never forget that moment, and that's one of my joys of
Yeah.
going to concerts. The unpredictability in that live moment. He was so moved by his own experience, and that's not an egotistical thing. He was just moved by singing a song that's so
Yeah.
sublime.
I think the best thing about the song though is the vulnerability and the modesty of the writer. Most love songs have wounded egos
Yes.
or proud egos or
Yeah.
boasting egos. There's no ego in this. Brian Wilson knows that he's just a grain of sand. He doesn't
Mm.
think he's important or anything's important. He thinks that life and love is much bigger than him. And that's why it's called God Only Knows, because he knows without love, he's absolutely nothing at all. And that sentiment is very rarely done except by corny songs. That sort of sentiment's usually corny, and God Only Knows is definitely, definitely not corny. So, yeah, yeah, it is a great song. You're right.
And Graham, it's fair to say that love is the most uh, tackled subject of all in music. There have been so many songs about love. And maybe actually that's the other reason that I love exactly what you said as to why God Only Knows stands out above. I think love is incredibly difficult to define. It's why it's written about so often in myriad forms. And music is one of the most poetic ways to express it. It's transcendent, the power of music in what it can do. And love is transcendent. Of course, it's the most transcendent of all emotions that we have. And yet somehow it's bigger. And he acknowledges that in those three words, God only knows. That's why
Mm.
I put it there. And I think it's because we all experience love. It's the feeling that comes to define life more than anything else, I think. And that's why it's written about more than anything else. And I think the way that he's written about it in the beauty of a pop song, which is a minimalist form of writing, and yet to have that much power within that makes it the most sublime song. So I'm sticking to my
Yeah, I'm not going to argue further, Charles. It's a borderline decision at best.
borderline. So Graham, I think there's one more point that you've got on your
Oh
list
yeah, well,
to
I
reflect
did
on,
actually
Brian.
see Brian Wilson with the Beach Boys in 2017 at Liverpool Exhibition Centre.
Yes.
And it wasn't a full band because Mike Love had his own version of the Beach Boys. So the band I saw had Brian, Al Jardine, and Blondie Chaplin, who was in a lot of stuff in the early 70s. He was a great
Mm,
musician,
mm,
and a bunch of guys I didn't recognize. And he was there to do the whole of Pet Sounds, plus lots of other tracks. And it was one of the last times he ever played all of Pet Sounds in its entirety live.
mm.
And it was a great gig. But I have to say that this is 2017. Brian only sang one song the whole way through.
Yeah.
Every other song that Brian sang, even God Only Knows, had other people in the band singing verses, and he would chip in with like half a verse or a chorus. So by 2017, he was already beyond doing the whole show himself, really. But what was great was to actually hear those classic songs live because
Oh,
I Get Around in California Girls are just pop songs, and you've heard them a million times. But when you hear them played live, you almost cry because even though they're not very deep, they're not God Only Knows or Surfs Up. They're absolutely perfect, and you realize
mm,
that when they're played live, you realize these songs are absolutely flawless, and
mm.
so it was quite emotional. But on top of that, he didn't play a single track from Smile, and I think and he played 38 songs altogether at Liverpool
And
at
none from
that gig.
Smile.
Not a single track from Smile. I think that's because Smile was and it was one step too far to reach the utter heights of what you can do as a human being in art. He was stretching way beyond what was comfortably possible. And it was almost like he flew too close to the sun when he tried to do Smile.
Just a cheeky last question, Graham, to reflect on. What would Mike Love be feeling right now?
Yeah, well, the Beach Boys were a bit like the Beatles. Like even when the Beatles fell out, they still were like brothers. And Mike Love, despite despite not
I
being
know
the same
I know
planet
that's a
really
salty
as
question to
Brian,
ask.
yeah, despite Mike Love never being quite the same planet as Brian Wilson, you know, they still had a good relationship overall. They just did not see eye to eye on a lot of day-to-day things. But I think there's one strange thing about the legacy of Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys.
Hmm.
Right now, what Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys did mainly between 66 and 70
Hmm.
still influences an awful lot of bands.
Yeah.
And the sound of that era that they created still sounds that sort of mix of minimalism and pop, Baroque classical music, and sort of like early Americana,
Hmm.
nostalgic Edwardian Victorian.
Hmm.
That's still influential now, but it's only influential on independent alternative arty bands. And the biggest irony of the Beach Boys is they were nearly the biggest pop band in
Yeah.
the world in the 1960s, and yet their long lasting influence is on the arty part of the music world, not the popular part.
Compare and contrast with the Beatles, or actually, can you see some similarities there?
There's a lot of crossover, which is why the
Yes.
Beach Boys influenced the Beatles and the Beatles influenced the Beach Boys.
So, Graham, obviously, the sheer beauty of the music making would suggest you should go and visit Bang and Olufsen in Harrogate to find a sound system to match the beauty of the Beach Boys music. That's my link to your second element for this evening. Bang and Olufsen, usually in my head, expensive, high quality, high end, well beyond what I
Yeah,
can afford.
yeah. Well, me visiting the Bang and Olufsen shop in Harrogate on Station Parade in the posh Prince's Row with expensive hi-fis, expensive home cinemas, expensive TVs. I mean, me and that sort of shop don't really go together. I mean, it's a bit like expecting Ozzy Osbourne to be shy, modest, and avoid publicity. It's just not me. But this whole thing was created by our producer Antony, who also went along on Saturday morning
Ah,
to a presentation by the new owner
oh,
with pastries and coffee, which is always welcome. And the new owner was a great guy, really intelligent, a lot of experience in the music industry and in marketing. I think he was high up in Virgin Megastores in the days when Richard Branson used to care about Virgin Megastores. So he was doing a listening session with pastries and coffees. I mean, how can you say no, especially when your producer Anthony's wangled it? So we both went along, and it was all fantastic. And it was called Tracks and Tales, and had notes written by the owner, a bit like vinyl sessions that I do. And he
yes.
played a few tracks from Steely Dan's classic 1967 album, Asia. And it was all, great. But there's always a but.
I thought there might be.
Uh, his notes were all interesting analysis of the meaning of Steely Dan's Asia album.
Hmm.
But then he cheerfully chatted, and this is a man who embraces modern technology a hell lot more than me. He cheerfully chatted to the assembled crowd in Bang Olufsen in Harrogate, and cheerfully said that he'd written the notes explaining the meaning of the album by using chatbot on AI. And I thought, oh, obviously, researching anything these days involves a visit to the internet. But does this mean that his opinions are actually created by AI? And
Oh.
that was I found that a bit alarming because what's the point of presenting opinions that essentially aren't your own?
So that's well, Graham. I mean, that might become the norm. I might suggest.
Yeah, I think sadly you're right, Charles. I think within 10 years, nobody in the Western world will have their own opinions because they'll all be created by AI.
It does begin to look that way, and it didn't convince you anyway to go and put some money down for Bang& Olufsen Hi-Fi Classic.
Well, obviously the sound system was fantastic. You could tell that when he played the Steely Dan tracks. But
Hmm.
in my entire life, I've spent a fortune on buying music and going to. It's just I always
I've
think
been the
that
same. I've been the same. I did.
what matters about the music. You said this earlier.
Hmm.
Music is fundamentally about the emotional effect it has
Yeah,
on you.
yeah,
Music is about enjoying music is about how it makes you feel.
yeah.
To get that effect, you do not need to spend £100,000 or twenty five
I
thousand
entirely
pounds.
agree. I have always had rubbish. I don't even want to call them sound systems. I have still have a sort of a tape cassette machine, a very basic, not at all deep in its sound quality record player, and that's never been what it's about for me. It is always about what I'm listening to, and I don't want the scientific experience should never lead that. And I mean, you never. I mean, at concerts, if someone says, "Oh, it was a terrible night because the sound system just wasn't quite good enough," well, it can have an influence. I know, I acknowledge it can have
Oh
an
yeah, if you
influence.
can't hear the vocals, yeah.
I remember the last time I saw Teenage Fan Club in Leeds was at the Polytechnic as was, and actually the sound, it was very muffled and blurred, and it kind of ruined the gig on one level. But on the other hand, I still appreciated the songs. I liked the chemistry of the musicians. So there were many factors that still were enjoyable. But I never ever want to be in a situation where it's dictated by the quality of sound. There are people who think it's important, but I can't see it that way. I just think if the song's good enough, it'll work through any system.
Does this mean we're starting a campaign to bring back wind-up gramophones and 78s?
Graham, I'm going to be listening to music dressed in the finest bow tie and velvet jacket and doing 1950s vocal announcements to myself for the joy of introducing albums. Yes, that is the future. I can see it now. And now,
I'm
talking
going
of
to
the
learn
past,
banjo.
yeah, talking of the past, and I don't mean this because this is a living band, the Rolling Stones, but this
Yeah.
is I recommend going to this exhibition. It's only
Oh, yeah.
actually on for rather a short time. So this is Christopher Simon Sykes, photographer, who in 1975 joined the Rolling Stones on their tour of the Americas, known
Oh,
as
yeah. With Ron Wood on guitar, wasn't he?
so Ronnie's debut. This was Ronnie's debut,
Mm.
the Tota 75 tour. And in this exhibition, he took, while he was there, they played 40 cities in 27 days. He joined after the first week. First night he played, he was photographing out, was in Milwaukee. He hadn't actually got the pass. He had all the accreditation, but for some reason he didn't have the stage pass tonight, so he had to be at the back of the stage. But he took one memorable image that night. The only time that Mick Jagger faced him was when, so it was before the encore, and he was taking a breather at the back of the stage. Was Jagger, just
Mm.
deep breaths. So it's a picture of he's looking absolutely exhausted in this picture and covered buckets of sweat. It's a brilliant image, and that's the first image as
Mm.
you go into the courtyard room at Sledmere House. Is this image of Jagger? There's 30. Well, I think correction, 34 images actually.
Where is Sledmere House,
Right.
Charles?
So for our listeners, Sledmere
Mm.
House is Sledmere near Driffield. So
Oh, yeah.
it's heading out that
East
way.
Yorkshire.
Yeah,
East
absolutely,
Yorkshire. Yeah.
absolutely. It's one of Yorkshire's most beautiful stately homes, and it's been in the
Wow.
South
So the
Family.
Stones now have exhibitions in stately homes. That says a lot.
Well, the situation is that the only previous time these photographs have been exhibited was in, I think, it was at the Getty Images. Christopher was having dinner with Mark Getty, and Getty had just started Getty Images. And he
Mm.
said to him, "Oh, I've got these Stones photographs from 1975. I think they'd make a good exhibition." So Getty Images did indeed do a London exhibition. And it's the only time they'd ever been exhibited. So this is the first chance ever in
Mm.
Yorkshire to see some of these images, 34 of them in all, from the 1975 tour.
Does it show the
Mainly to do
Stones
with,
in good form? Because the Stones, as a live experience, peaked about 72 and have been up and down ever since. Sometimes
so
properly down.
I mean, that's interesting because obviously one of the things there is that, I didn't see the Stones in 1975. I think I first saw them in the 1980s, I think it must have been, and 1990s. And so you're right. So, and they take on a kind of iconic status in a way of looking back at them. But
Mm.
at the same time that he was photographing, so was Annie Leibovitz. What it was is that Christopher was asked ultimately by, well, Prince is a great name. There's Prince Rupert Lowenstein
Oh, yeah.
asked him, who's the
Yeah.
financial manager at the time, taken over
Mm.
from Klein doing the job. And it came about through him that he did this. And so he wrote the tour diary and the photographs. And Mick Jagger looked at the tour diary and said, "No, that's too boring." So he got Terry Southern to write the notes instead. And Southern hadn't even been to
Mm-hmm.
the tour at all.
Yeah,
But
who wrote The Magic Christian and Doctor
that's it,
Strangelove and Easy Rider.
correct. So, however, the images do work in their own way, and they're some black and white, some color. There's backstage, the dressing rooms, tour bus, live concert photographs, a whole cross section. You had access all areas over
Yeah,
that
this is an
time.
interesting question, Charles. If you
Yes.
see photographs of the Stones on tour in America in 69 or
Yeah.
72,
Yeah.
you can actually tell from the pictures there's a bit of dishevelment and debauchery. It
You can,
looks really loose and a bit messy. How do they look by 75 backstage,
they,
etc.?
they look emaciated.
Mm.
There is no,
Like they've been doing too much.
there is no flesh on any of them.
Ah.
I look at Charlie Watts. He looks absolutely emaciated. And there's one of Bill Wyman. There's no flesh on him at all. But
Yeah,
they
yeah.
still look cool as hell as a band though. They do. That's
I think
absolutely
possibly they were in terms of like caning it across the board. probably the early 70s, the mid 70s was the absolute peak of bathing like that. So that could be the reason.
I mean, there are some of the most iconic images you could have of Keith Richards. There is one which I think maybe or the others' favourites from it's the T-shirt, the famous language coming up. Who the FUCK is Mick Jagger? Do you know that? Do you know that one?
No.
So it's featured in other Stones exhibitions as well, and it's one of the
Mm,
images
mm,
that's
mm.
and it encapsulates perfectly. He's the by far he's cooler than Jagger. We know he's cooler than Jagger,
Yeah.
and it kind of comes across with that, and it comes across partly because he's trying to antagonize him, but also there's the love there between the two of them. And I think this
Mm,
photograph
mm,
absolutely distills the relationship between the
mm,
two of them
mm,
really, really well. A lot of the photographs, Keith and Mick are prominent in them, but you do have images of Charlie. You do have images of Bill, and you have there's one of what looks like two security guards that's in it as well. So you kind of get a cross section of images. There's a wonderful
mm.
one where Mick's reading the morning's newspaper and he's looking as dandy as anything in a striped jacket and a dandy
Yeah.
and a dandy hat. They do look iconic and cool. They're what you
Mm,
want the
mm,
Stones
mm.
to be in the photographs, and that can
Yeah.
be, as we know, that can be at any age with them. So, and it is. I mean, does it capture the sense of a band being on the road? Absolutely, it absolutely does that. Interestingly, the other side of the story to tell is that Christopher himself, he'd originally done photographs of stately homes, and then he'd done a project with Lord Hesketh, who you will recall Lord Hesketh in the 1970s set up a motor racing team because as a
Mm.
wealthy man, he wanted to prove that he could win a Grand Prix. Of course, who was his famous driver that he had?
Graham Hill?
James Hunt, the young James Hunt.
James Hunt. Of
So he had the
course.
young James Hunt. Now,
Mm.
so Christopher photographs this, and actually, this is what Prince Rupert gets to see. He did a memorial album, Christopher, for Lord Hesketh, and
Mm.
he thought, you'd be ideal to do this Stones exhibition. So he gets this job doing the Stones exhibition. But one of the things that when I interviewed Christopher, that he told me, he said there came a point where it just actually became monotonous what he was doing
Mm.
because
Mm. Mm.
there would be a routine. So he would get up in the morning. The only Stone that got up in the morning would be Jagger, who like Christopher liked to go out and actually do a bit of sightseeing or whatever.
Yeah.
But the rest of them were, caning it through the night or whatever, and wouldn't be getting up until the afternoon. And Christopher said that in the end, actually, it became too monotonous for him as a photographer. Um,
Yeah.
and which is and so,
Also, he couldn't actually partake in all that stuff because they would have killed him, and he wouldn't have done his job at all.
that may well be true, that side of it. I mean, but interestingly, he therefore never did any rock and roll photography. It's the only rock and roll photography that
Oh
he ever
wow,
did in his career.
that's interesting. That's
And yet,
interesting.
I absolutely love this photographs that he's done, and I think the fact that this is the only time he did it
Mm.
makes them more significant as well, because he
Mm.
wasn't bringing. I mean, Annie Leibovitz obviously was a significant photographer already by that stage, and actually, the first book that came out, this tour diary book that came out, Dragon's Dream was the company that published it, a
Mm.
company I think based in Holland, and I think they did some of the. Was it Roger Dean? Was it Roger Dean?
Yeah. Well, no, Richard Dean was all the prog rock covers, like
Yes, but
yes.
I think they published some of
Oh,
his
really?
work as
Okay.
well. I think so.
Hmm.
So it's not bringing someone steeped in rock music.
So there aren't any rock and roll cliched angles going on.
I think that's the thing. I think that the thing
Mm.
that I like about it is it's not even a journalistic instinct that he's necessarily bringing. He just has an eye for a photograph. Now
Yeah.
you can have a journal, you can have a photographic journalist's eye for it. You can have a portrait artist like Annie Leibovitz's ability for it. I thought he brought
Yeah.
something else to it. I just think he brings a natural eye to photography. There were around
You
about.
know what?
Go on, Graham.
You know what sort of photographer they should have sent on tour
Go
with the
on.
Stones in the
Yeah.
1970s that would have worked really well. A war photographer.
Mm. Now that would have been interesting. I'm trying to
Mm.
remember his name. You'll
Because
be able to.
going on tour with the Stones is hard work.
What's his name? The most famous war photographer.
John McCullen.
Yeah. Now that would have been interesting to have sent him.
Mm. Mm.
Good point. So anyway, I do recommend it going, but it's not a long run. I think from
When's it
memory.
on to? When's it
Well,
finish?
so I think it may only be as long as July the 6th, I think, possibly.
Good
I'm
grief.
frantically trying to find the. Now let's have a look.
And how many photographs are there in the exhibition, Charles?
34 photographs. The title is On Tour with the Rolling Stones, 1975. A 50th anniversary exhibition of photographs of the Rolling Stones tour of the Americas, 1975.
And how many photographs
Strange
again?
enough on this, it doesn't say when it's running to, but I'm pretty convinced.
How many photographs, Charles?
How many what?
How many photographs in the exhibition in total?
34.
Okay.
Now, there is a possibility that a London exhibition might happen. There's nothing confirmed yet. The other thing that's interesting, and I know we're running out of time, Genesis Publications in 2001 did a wonderful book, 2 versions, a standard book and a special edition, in which they actually, so Christopher's original tour diary stories all featured in that, plus a lot more of the photographs. And it tells the full story. And although it's not confirmed, and Genesis Publications still exist, there is a possibility they might look at doing a 50th anniversary edition of it, which would be wonderful. They're one of those by subscription services, but there's plenty of books like that Taschen Books do, for example. So maybe that will happen as well. And there is nothing confirmed for a London exhibition, but that might happen too. So thoroughly recommended. And I think it's July the 6th from recollection that it finishes. And if it isn't, we'll update next week. But I would...
That sounds like something new. In the overwritten story of the Rolling Stones, this sounds like a small new cul-de-sac.
Absolutely.
Or avenue.
Well worth driving up that cul-de-sac.
One-way street.
Splendid, Graham. I think we're into our last minute. So if you've got any interruptions...
You need to watch documentary filmmaker Adam Curtis's new series on BBC iPlayer called Shifty. It's about how the 1980s created the world we're now living in, i.e. a world of chaos and fake news and disasters.
Can we look at that next week? I'd be interested to look at that next week.
Yeah. It's worth watching, I'll tell you.
Good.
It's a bit mind-blowing.
Splendid. Well, Graham, I think we're in our last minute, and thanks ever so much. And just to raise a glass to Brian Wilson, and God bless him, and what he brought to music, and what joy he brought to us, and the pleasures of listening to Brian Wilson.
Surf really is up.
Surf is really up, and so is our time's up, Graham. So that's great. Have a cracking good week.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.